Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walah. Welcome to week 2 of the course on Islamic economics. We are looking at the capitalist economic system. Last week we looked at the secular Enlightenment worldview, which is the basis of the capitalist economic system. And this week we are looking at the goals and strategy of capitalism. So last week we looked at the definition of economic system. We defined economic system as the means by which goods and services are produced in an economy to fulfill the needs of the people. And we said every economic system has three components. It has a worldview, it has goals and objectives, and it has a strategy to achieve those goals and objectives and fulfill the needs of the people. So whether it's the Islamic economic system or the capitalist economic system, each one of them has those three components, i.e. the worldview, the goals, and a strategy or a coordination mechanism. So we also looked last week at the Enlightenment, the secular worldview, which underpins the capitalist economic system. So in the Enlightenment, we saw the marginalization of God and religion, exclusion of revelation from the epistemology, the focus on materialism, the focus on reason and self-interest, and the use of reason to solve mankind's problems. And today we will continue from there. So what are the learning objectives of this week? So first we're going to look at the goals of the capitalist economic system. In addition, we'll look at the fundamental concepts which are emanating from the worldview. And then we'll look at the strategy of the capitalist economic system, which is the market mechanism. So let's set the context for this lecture by two quotes from Adam Smith from his book, The Wealth of Nations. So the first quote says, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages." The second quote is, "Every individual neither intends to promote the public interest, nor knows how much he is promoting it. He intends only his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was never of his intention." End quote. So there are a couple of key ideas in these two quotes which really summarizes the capitalist economic system as laid down by Adam Smith. So the first main idea is the idea of self-interest. So last week we looked at the idea of self-interest, and we said this was promoted, and the idea of individuality was very central in the Enlightenment thought. And the idea in summary of Adam Smith's idea is that self-interest, if people pursue self-interest and that self-interest is channeled through the market, that will lead to universal opulence or welfare of the people. And he gives the example of the butcher, the brewer, and the baker to say that each one of those people, they act in their self-interest. So they come to the market, they produce certain goods, the meat and the wine and the bread, and they sell it. And by their self-interested action, which is the sale of these goods, they are actually leading to the opulence of the society or the welfare of the society, because people need to consume those goods and services to fulfill their needs. So what he's trying to do is he is justifying the idea of self-interest channeled through the market leading to something good. as compared to the Christian tradition where selfishness or self-interest was disdained and decried. Adam Smith is actually celebrating the idea of self-interest. And before him, of course, there were many other thinkers like Thomas Hobbes, Mandeville, and you had Voltaire. You had several people who were discussing similar ideas that self-interest is good, self-interest uh, can lead to something beneficial for the society. And of course, these Enlightenment thinkers are reacting to previous traditions, i.e., the Christian tradition and the Republican tradition. So the second main idea is that of the invisible hand. And the invisible hand is basically the idea of unintended positive consequences. So people acting in their self-interest, the consumers and the producers come to the market to act in their self-interest. So they don't have any benevolent intentions when they come to the market. But because of the market mechanism, because of the supply and demand, that leads to beneficial outcomes without any intention. So the idea is self-interest channeled through the market leads to beneficial outcomes for the society. This is in summary the crux of the classical capitalist thought, and we will delve more into that in today's lecture. So with that introduction, let's now move on to the next section, which is the goals of capitalism. So what is the goal of capitalism? Now, last week we looked at the secular Enlightenment worldview, and we said that in this worldview, man is not concerned with higher pursuits like salvation. Rather, the man is materialistic, and in economics, we refer to this kind of man as a Homo economicus, who is a rational economic man who exists to maximize his utility and pleasures. So in the absence of any higher goals and objectives in life, the purpose of a capitalistic man is to maximize his pleasures, and that he does by consuming goods and services. So the objective of the capitalist economic system is to provide the rational economic man with the maximum amount of goods and services to fulfill the wants. And accordingly, the focus of the capitalist economic system is on accelerating the growth and production in the economy to increase the size of the economic pie. And it is assumed that more growth will lead to a better satisfaction of wants. Let's now move on to the strategy of capitalism, which is also called as the coordination mechanism or the method of capitalism. So to understand the strategy, we need to look at some of the concepts of classical economics, which emanate from the secular Enlightenment worldview. So the first concept we're going to look at is the concept of laws of economics. And this is coming from a Newtonian understanding of the world. So Newton saw the universe as a machine governed by laws of physics. And this led to a mechanistic understanding of the world where physical phenomena could be explained through natural laws and cause and effect relationships. So what the classical economists did was to follow a similar methodology, and accordingly Adam Smith saw an economy like a machine that, when left to its own devices, would regulate itself towards an optimal state through the interaction of the self-interested individuals. So as I mentioned, the idea was when self-interested individuals come together to the market, they would interact, and that interaction, if there is competition in the market, that competition and that interaction would lead to universal opulence, would lead to the welfare of the society, because the needs of the people will be satisfied. Of course, he explains the mechanism, which is that when people trade and supply goods in the market, they have to adopt a policy of specialization and division of labor. And when people produce goods for the market, they specialize, and then once they specialize, they have a higher productivity. They are able to produce more goods and services, and then that increase in the output, of course, would lead to the satisfaction of wants for a larger number of people. And if there is enough competition in the market, that would lead to a reduction in the prices of these goods. So on one end is the producer, who is producing in mass quantities, and on the other hand is the consumer, who's getting these products at a low price because of competition. So the self-interested producers are coming in, producing a large amount of output. The self-interested consumers are coming to the market to consume goods and services, and then through the competitive process, they are able to get these products at a low price, and that's basically the invisible hand, the unintended benefits of the market. So that's the idea, that there is no need of any intervention, and like a machine, things will fall in place as long as there is competition in the market. So the only qualification which the classical economists and the neoclassicals and so forth, what they're focusing on is, if competition is ensured in the market, then of course the economy can run on autopilot without need of any intervention from the government. So economics since then has been modeled on this Newtonian understanding, where the economists are trying to understand the laws of economics and to predict human behavior in a similar way like Newton predicted and analyzed the laws of physics. The next concept is the concept of the rational economic man, which is also called as the Homo economicus. So in the capitalist economic system, the representative man, or the economic agent, is assumed to be only motivated by self-interest. So economic agent is either the producer or the consumer, and they are both driven by their self-interest. So in the case of the producer is trying to maximize his profits, while the consumer is trying to maximize the satisfaction and utility derived from consuming goods and services. So both are trying to maximize their profits and utility when they come to the market. And this self-interest is similar to gravity in that it coordinates the movements in the economy without any intervention. So self-interest was made equivalent to the force of gravity, and just as gravitation produces a coordinated movement amongst the planets, so similarly self-interest organizes the movements of humans in an economy. So the next concept is the concept of positivism, which means that the only true knowledge is that which is based on observed facts gained through scientific investigation. And accordingly, value judgments became irrelevant and economics drifted away from ethics. So the entire focus of the economics discipline became on the empirical data, which was considered to be value free and positive, and it was emphasized that normative judgments should be kept out of economics because beliefs are subjective. Each person has different beliefs and ideas, and if we try to bring in beliefs into economics, then it would lead to conflict and strife, as happened after the Reformation in Europe. So ethics and morals were very consciously excluded from the discipline of economics, and human reason and individuality were used as the basis to found and develop the discipline of classical economics. So the next concept is the concept of social Darwinism, and this is the idea that humans are subject to the same laws of nature as the animals. And recall last week we said that according to Thomas Hobbes, people are self-interested and they want to maximize their self-interest. So maximization of the self-interest leads to competition in the society. Now, social Darwinism goes a step forward and it says if people are competing, it's a good thing. Let the strong survive, let the weak perish. So in society, as in the nature, as in the animal kingdom, let the most fit individuals and groups survive while the weak are eliminated. So in terms of economics, what it means is that competition is a good thing, since more competition in the market would lead to a higher efficiency, innovation, and products being produced at low prices. And the less fit, the inefficient producers may perish and leave the market. And this idea of social Darwinism is used to argue against social programs and government intervention, saying that these interventions interfere with the natural economic laws, and the survival of the fittest is the best policy in the marketplace. So in this vein, Thomas Malthus, a very famous English economist, he said that a man who is born into a world already possessed, if he cannot get substance from his parents, on whom he has a just demand, and if the society does not want his labor, he has no claim of right to the smallest portion of food, and in fact he has no business to be where he is. At nature's mighty feast, there is no vacant cover for him. She tells him to be gone, and will quickly execute her own orders. Now, Malthus is saying that the only way a human being should survive in a society is by providing labor. So, if you can be a labor, if you are useful and productive for the society, you are allowed to live. Or if your parents can afford your food and shelter, you may survive. But don't expect anything from the society or the government, because you unproductive laborer, or you unproductive person, do not deserve to live, and you can just die if you don't contribute. So this is the mentality of social Darwinism, that the weak may perish if he is not contributing enough to the national output. So far, we've looked at the worldview of capitalism and some of the concepts related to capitalism. So now let's move on to the implications. So what are the implications of the secular Enlightenment worldview and the related concepts? So let's start with another quote by Adam Smith, who said, "Human society, when we contemplate it in a certain abstract and philosophical light, appears like an immense machine whose regular and harmonious movements produce 1,000 agreeable effects." So this idea is similar to what we've been discussing, that uh, transactions and self-interested behavior channeled through the market would lead to universal opulence, and agreeable effects would lead to benefits for the entire society. So that's number one. So self-interested behavior is being condoned in the marketplace. And another concept, another implication is that there is a harmonious movement, which is that there is no need of intervention in the marketplace as long as there is competition. So if of course the competition is distorted, or if producers try uh, to to cause market imperfections, of course the government may intervene, but as a general rule, the idea is let the system run on autopilot without any intervention. The next implication is the divorce of economics from ethics and morals. So the emphasis on self-interest and positive economics played an important role in undermining the moral commitment to equitable distribution of wealth. So, so the ideas of social justice and economic justice were excluded from the discipline because it was thought that the discipline of economics should be built on value-free foundations. So capitalism is thus a system which gives highest value to unfettered freedom to the individuals to maximize the self-interest. Secondly, the laws of the market economy, like the laws of physics, are objectively valid. Competition is the best guarantee of general welfare. The invisible hand of the market leads to unintended positive consequences through the market mechanism. And finally, there is no need for value judgments or government intervention. If the state did not intervene, and if the private entrepreneurs, the private economic agents were left free to interact in the market, and if there is sufficient competition in the market, that would lead to optimum welfare of everybody because of higher productivity, increased output, the lower costs of production, and lower prices of goods and services. So far, we've looked at the worldview of capitalism, we've looked at the goals of capitalism and some of the concepts of the capitalist economic system. So let's now move on to the strategy of the capitalist economic system, which is the market mechanism. So let's define wealth because it's very central to the discussion on capitalism. So before Adam Smith or before classical economics, we had two other schools of thought, which were namely the mercantilists and the physiocrats. So the mercantilists were in around 16th and 17th centuries, and these people, these thinkers, defined wealth in a specific way. They thought that the national wealth was gold, and the economic policy was accordingly promotion of external trade, which would lead to the accumulation of gold. And on the other hand, you had the physiocrats in France. So these were some economists and thinkers in France who defined wealth as land. So they believed that all wealth originated from land. So in their view, agriculture was the economic sector that produces a surplus that creates new wealth, as opposed to manufacturing and trade, which merely transform existing materials. So in the view of the physiocrats, land was wealth, and in the view of the mercantilists, gold was wealth. So Smith disagreed with both the mercantilists and physiocrats, and he defined wealth as the goods and services in an economy. So in his view, the production of goods and services leads to an improvement in the standard of living of the people, of the common folk, and that is actually real wealth of a nation. The wealth of nation is goods and services. And based on that definition, he explained the market mechanism and other aspects of his philosophy. And the later thinkers after Adam Smith relied on this definition of wealth and built their different theories and ideas around this definition of wealth. And in fact, we see this also in the in the indicators of national output, we have the GDP, we have the GNP, which is the market value of goods and services. So the wealth of the nation is the GDP, which is the goods and services. So this idea, of course, goes back to Adam Smith. It's very important to understand, because this idea of wealth will determine what the economic system will try to achieve. So once wealth is defined in this way as goods and services, then the system will try to maximize the production of goods and services, because obviously more goods and services means more wealth, which means a higher standard of living, which means universal opulence and welfare. So let us now move on to the market mechanism. The market mechanism starts with the consumer, who is a sovereign. So consumers act rationally, and they try to maximize their utility by buying goods at the lowest price. Their preferences are reflected in the marketplace through the demand, and demand is defined in a very specific way. So demand of consumers is the willingness to buy certain goods and services, and also having the ability to buy those goods and services. So for example, you could have a poor person who would like to eat food, and he has a demand. I mean, linguistically, he has a demand or the willingness to buy food. But if he doesn't have the money to buy the goods or to buy the food, then actually that's not demand in the marketplace. So demand in the marketplace means that poor person should have the money to buy food. Otherwise, that demand or that willingness of the poor person is not reflected in the market. The next component of the market mechanism is the production or the producer, who acts rationally and responds passively to the demand by producing at the lowest cost possible. So recall that the producer is a profit maximizer. He tries to maximize the profit by reducing the cost to the extent possible. So the producer brings together land, labor, and capital to produce goods and services to satisfy the needs of the people. The next component is competition. Competition is central. Businesses face competition from other businesses. This makes sure that the prices are reasonable, and if one business charges too much for a product, competition will ensure that a new competitor will undercut them by offering a similar product at a lower price. So competition in the marketplace will make sure that the goods and services are offered at a low price, and this low price, of course, will benefit the consumers who will be able to afford these new goods and services produced by the producers. And finally, we have the allocative efficiency, this free interaction of the consumers and the producers under competitive market conditions will determine the price for goods and services. These prices lead to the production of that configuration of goods which is in maximum harmony with consumer preferences. So the price mechanism ensures that the resources are allocated to their most valued uses. The goods and services that consumers value the most, i.e. the willingness to pay the most for, are the ones that producers have the greatest incentive to produce. And this is called as the efficient allocation of resources. To say it differently, now when the producers are producing goods at a low price, that is fulfilling the demand of the consumers, and nothing is wasted because there is already a demand in the market. So there is no waste. So the producers produce what the consumers want, and this is called as the efficient allocation of resources. So the resources are allocated perfectly. The consumers' needs and wants are satisfied. The producers' profit is maximized because they have been able to produce at the lowest cost possible, and this has led to universal opulence because the prices of goods are low, and this is the capitalist utopia in a sense. So under conditions of free market and perfect competition, it is assumed that the market mechanism leads to both efficiency and equity. So just to recall that there are four factors of production typically, which are the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So what the theory says is that each factor of production will get a reward based on the productivity in a competitive market, which reflects the contribution to the production process. So let's start with the first factor of production, which is the land. So the landowner gets rent. So if the land is more productive, then the rent will be higher, and it is equitable because the rent corresponds to the contribution to the production. So fertile land will yield a higher rent than a non-fertile land or a barren land. So the higher rent is a reward to the landowner for the fertility of the land. So this is fair. The next is the labor. So the next factor of production is the labor, and the labor gets a fair wage. And the idea is that the labor market compensates workers based on their skill level and the values they add to the final product. So higher skill would mean a higher salary or a higher wage, which means that it is fair, and the market has ensured justice for the laborers. The third factor of production is the capital, and capital includes the tools, the machinery, and technology used in production. So more advanced technology can get a higher return. So the owner of the machine would get a higher return, a higher rent, if the technology is more useful in production. If the machine is less useful or less productive, it will get a lesser rent. So again, the market ensures fairness and justice by giving a higher rent to more productive machines and a lower rent to less productive machines. And finally, we have the fourth factor of production, which is the entrepreneur. So entrepreneur organizes the other factors of production and takes on the risk of bringing a product to the market. So whatever is left after paying the laborer, the capital, and the landowner, whatever is remaining is the profit of the entrepreneur. And again, this is fair because so landowner has been compensated fairly, the laborer has been compensated fairly, and the capital owner, the machine owner, has been compensated fairly. So whatever remains is also a fair compensation for the entrepreneur. So the idea is that there is contributive justice. So each factor of production is rewarded based on the contribution to the output process. So of course, as you see here, since market is taking care of justice and fairness, there is no need of any external intervention. So production and the factors of production, they come together, and without any external intervention, they're all rewarded fairly, and thereby we have both efficiency and equity in a free market, in a competitive market situation. So let's wrap it up and just touch on the main things that we've discussed. The first is the focus on production. We said capitalism defines wealth as the amount of goods and services in an economy. So obviously, to increase the wealth requires an increase in the production of goods and services. So that is the focus of the capitalist system. The second important aspect is freedom and private property. So to motivate the private producers to produce goods and services for the market, it is important that they have freedom and they have private property so that they can enjoy the profits of their enterprise. So freedom and private property are essential to for the market mechanism to operate and to motivate the producers. Free markets are very important, and this is because if the markets are not free, if they are influenced by lobbyists or the producers or any interest group, then the benefits of production will not be transferred to the consumers. So for the market mechanism to work, it's important that the markets are free. And there are many sellers and buyers in the market, so that the power, there is no power differential in the economy. The next concept is laissez-faire. So if there are many buyers and sellers in the market, there is no need of government intervention, because the forces of supply and demand will meet together in the market, and self-interested individuals, the producers and consumers, will come together, and that will lead to positive consequences. And lastly, there is the idea of alignment of individual and social interests. So the invisible hand of the market will operate. So when self-interested people come together in the market and they channel their self-interest through the market, it leads to unintended positive consequences. So self-interest leads to positive consequences for the whole society, because it leads to the provision of goods and services, and it also leads to lower costs and lower prices for the consumers and the producers. So without even having the intention to be benevolent or moral, the market ensures that the individual self-interest is aligned with the social interests. So this is in summary the main features of the market mechanism and the capitalist economic system. So let us now move on to the analysis and critique of the capitalist economic system. So the first point of critique is the critique of the sovereign consumer. Now, in the absence of moral values, the sovereign consumer would demand any good or service as long as he has the ability to purchase, and this will have societal consequences. So to illustrate with an example, let's take the example of a real estate market. So let's say there are wealthy individuals who have the money to buy luxurious real estate properties, and they're willing to pay a high price for these properties. And at the same time, you have masses of people who need affordable housing, but they don't have the means to buy these luxurious properties. So let's look at the market dynamics. So on the demand side, you have these wealthy individuals who demand high-end luxurious properties, and they have the prices. And since these rich individuals provide a market signal, the suppliers, the developers will respond to this demand by building luxury apartments and villas and properties, allocating a significant portion of construction resources to these projects. Now, so supply and demand will come together, and the resources are disproportionately allocated to cater to the high-end market. And the land, the labor, the material, so which are all finite resources, are shifted away from social housing or affordable housing to luxurious housing and luxurious real estate properties, which the masses of people cannot afford. So this idea of sovereign consumer demanding anything and the market responding does not lead to universal opulence. For example, in this case, the universal opulence would have been social housing, construction of social housing and affordable homes, that would have been universal opulence. Rather, because the wealth is not evenly distributed in the society, the demand and the ability to pay by these rich individuals led to a misallocation of resources, and the sovereign consumer actually led to a bad outcome for the society and the masses of people. So without moral values guiding consumption, the sovereign consumer in this example does not self-regulate the demand for luxury housing regardless of the larger social consequences. So this is one example of unrestrained freedom of the consumer, and how self-interested consumer here in this case does not lead to positive outcomes for the society. Now, the other side of the equation is the passive producer. So we said the consumer is sovereign and he demands whatever he wills as long as he has the ability to pay. On the other side, you have the passive producer. Now, because wealth is not evenly distributed, the demands of wealthier individuals can have a disproportionate influence on the market. So the wealthier individuals can afford to pay more for the goods and services, which we saw in the previous example, and this can lead to a misallocation of resources. So what would happen is, if the rich are demanding something, then producers will over allocate or overproduce those luxury goods and underproduce the goods and services that are actually required in the market to fulfill the needs of everyone. So there is a misallocation of resources, overproduction of luxury goods, and underproduction of basic and essential goods which are required by the society. So the ability to pay the most will determine what gets produced. So the question of what to produce cannot be answered by market forces alone if the goal is to satisfy the needs of all individuals in society. So in the first lecture, we said there are three economic questions, economic problems that an economic system tries to solve. And one of the questions is what to produce. And if you leave the question of what to produce to the sovereign consumer and the passive producer, then of course these producers and consumers will come together to produce the wrong things in the society. So the consumer cannot be sovereign. His morality, his social considerations should be different, and the producer cannot be just passive because that would lead to a misallocation of goods and resources in an economy. So in this regard, Tony, he said something very, very powerful. Tony was a great economist and a critic of capitalism. He said a part of the goods which are annually produced and which are called wealth is strictly speaking waste, because it consists of articles which, though reckoned as part of the income of the nation, either should not have been produced until other articles had been produced in sufficient abundance, or should not have been produced at all. So he's saying the same idea more eloquently, that just producing whatever is demanded by sovereign rich consumers, it's not going to lead to universal opulence. This is a misallocation of resources. It is a waste, because if you are producing only for a small proportion of the population and you're neglecting the masses of people and their needs, then this is waste and injustice. So as a result of this wasteful production, the gross national product, the total national output, of course, increases, but it does not increase the well-being of the people who are bereft of these goods and services, because they don't have the means, the money to buy those luxurious goods and services that have been produced in the economy. So the next issue is the absence of moral filter in capitalism. So as we saw, so capitalism adopts a positivist methodology and tries to remain value-free and value-neutral, and doesn't try to focus on equity and justice. So in this paradigm, there is no consideration for passing judgments on needs and wants. So as we mentioned, whatever the consumer demands is produced by the producers. So whether the demands of the consumers are essential needs or they are luxurious wants, these are not considered as part of the capitalist judgment. So whatever the consumers demand is provided or produced by the producer. And the absence of this moral filter to differentiate needs from wants leads to misallocation of resources, as we saw in the previous slides. It leads to overproduction of wants and underproduction of essential needs which are required in a society. So one of the central issues with capitalism is that it creates a market society where everything is commodified. So the term market society implies a society where market values have infiltrated every aspect of life. In such a society, the logic of buy and sell dictates all kinds of transactions and human relationships. So broader concerns about morality and ethics and the environmental well-being are not incorporated and taken into account into the market analysis. So I'll give you a few examples of how humans and natural resources and money are commodified with the sole objective of profit maximization. So let's start with the commodification of humans. This refers to the idea that in a market society, human beings and their attributes can be bought and sold. So this can manifest in practices like the hiring of surrogate mothers. In modern market societies, couples can actually rent the wombs of women to incubate the babies. So you could actually rent the wombs, and these are for sale in the marketplace. So a human womb is for sale by the logic of the market. Similarly, we have the example of prostitution where women can sell their bodies or rent their bodies for money. Similarly, we have debt. So money, which is supposed to be a medium of exchange, actually becomes a commodity itself, and money can be bought and sold in the marketplace. Money can be rented, and the rent is the interest that's charged on it. So there are no ethical concerns related to the buying and selling of money or leasing the money. Everything is a commodity which is available for sale in the market. Similarly, we have the pollution rights. Corporations can buy pollution rights, and then this will give them the legal right to pollute the environment. So by paying money, they enjoy the right to pollute the environment. So the extent of commodification is vast. So if we look around us, everything is for sale. So humans have been commodified, land has been commodified, the natural resources have been commodified, water has been commodified, everything has been commodified, has been turned into a commodity for sale in the marketplace and for maximizing profits. And of course, this has caused tremendous damage to families. It has caused the breakdown of families. It has caused the rise of individualism. It has damaged the environment. It has caused a change in climate, and so on and so forth. The next issue is the creation of artificial desires and wants in the consumers. So consumers are not truly sovereign because their desires and behaviors are heavily influenced by marketing tactics. So businesses use marketing campaigns to appeal to consumers' vanity and competitive instincts. They employ strategies to convince consumers that they can achieve self-fulfillment through the purchase and consumption of products. Now, this process can distort consumers' judgment, especially if they have the financial resources to buy the goods they are being marketed, and they lack moral guidelines about consumption to counteract these influences. So what would happen is these marketing and business tactics would create artificial desires and consumerism, and consumers would end up purchasing far more than they actually need, leading to wasteful production and consumption. So the resources in this way will be misallocated towards wasteful and unnecessary production and consumption. And this issue of consumerism is further compounded by the expansion of consumer credit, as evident by the use of credit cards. So people who have a good credit score, they can get credit cards, and using those credit cards, they can buy unnecessary gadgets and luxury goods which are not really required. But since a market is created and producers want to sell them, they create an artificial demand, and with the help of credit cards, these unnecessary goods and services are produced and sold in the market. And again, going back to the previous examples, that these things lead to an overproduction of luxury and unnecessary goods and services, and underproduction of essential goods and services which are required by the masses of people. So next point is the lack of perfect competition. Classical economics assumes a picture of perfect competition where there are many buyers and sellers who interact in the open markets, and they have full access to information. The model assumes that such conditions lead to optimal pricing and resource allocation. However, the perfect competition is a myth. Real world markets are rife with imperfections, and the idea of perfect competition is a utopia which doesn't exist in the real world. So let's look at some of the issues. So in an ideal market, power is evenly distributed in a state of perfect competition. But in reality, we find imbalances, like we have monopolies or oligopolies, or the firms having more power. So, which means that these producers can manipulate the markets to their advantage. Additionally, information asymmetry is a common issue where one party holds more information than the other party, leading to exploitation. Moving on to the pricing efficiencies, prices in a classical capitalist framework are expected to reflect the true cost of production. However, this doesn't account for externalities. So the social costs, the externalities are not priced, and they're not incorporated into the costs. So this means that the societal costs of, for example, pollution or damage to the families are not reflected in the market prices. Finally, regarding the resource compensation, the classical model assumes that payments for the factors of production like labor and land are commensurate with their contributions to the output. However, we often find that there is a disconnect, so the workers are underpaid, or the environmental costs are not factored into the use of land, leading to both social and ecological imbalances. So the classical model is predicated on an understanding of a world where there is free trade and free markets and perfect competition, and only in that ideal scenario, an ideal situation, can the benefits of capitalism be realized. However, since the conditions of perfect market and perfect competition don't exist, this means that the individual interest actually doesn't lead to social interest, and individual self-interest actually doesn't lead to universal opulence, because the impossible conditions for the individual interest to lead to the universal opulence, those conditions do not exist in the real world. So next is the relationship between capitalism and social Darwinism. The concept of social Darwinism, i.e. the survival of the fittest, is associated with capitalism. And this perspective suggests that just as in nature, in an economic context, competition will lead to the strongest thriving while the weaker are left behind or perished. So this view of survival of the fittest does not prioritize socioeconomic justice or the equitable distribution of resources. So in the marketplace, if there are producers who are left behind, they are not rescued. Rather, competition requires, and the social Darwinist thinking requires, that the weaker producer should perish and get destroyed because he is inefficient. So there is no idea of cooperation. Rather, the idea is only the most competitive and the most efficient producers should sustain and continue. The weaker ones should perish. Similarly, we looked at a quote from Malthus previously, which said that the consumers who produce in the market, who offer their labor, are allowed to survive. Otherwise, they should just die. So if laborers are not are fit enough, they do not contribute, then they must die. So again, the idea of survival of the fittest, both in the labor market as well as in the product market. So similarly, in a capitalist system, there is a significant emphasis on individualism and the fulfillment of personal desires, and the system lacks a formal incentive structure to encourage individuals to act in the collective interest of society. So the pursuit of self-interest may not always align with social welfare, which is a big assumption of capitalism, as we've been looking all along, that capitalism assumes that the individual interest channeled through the market will actually lead to universal opulence. But as we saw, there are many unrealistic assumptions and requirements, like the presence of free markets, perfect competition, many buyers and many sellers, perfect information, and so on and so forth. So if those ingredients are missing, then the individual interest will not lead to social welfare. So in the pursuit of social self-interest actually does damage the social welfare, as we've seen some examples previously. So the survival of the fittest and this idea of self-interest together is a very dangerous worldview, which can lead to significant inequities and injustices in the society. So the next point is about the lack of focus on distribution. So in the capitalist economic system, income distribution is not an independent subject. This is because it is assumed that efficient production will automatically bring about a distribution which is in conformity with the contribution made by the marginal product of each factor of production to the total revenue. So it is assumed that since there is competition in the market and there is the labor is free to move and the capital is free, there is perfect competition, there is free trade, there are private property rights, the producers are profit maximizers, they try to maximize their efficiency, they try to increase their productivity. So with all those assumptions, basically what happens is the goods are produced at the lowest cost possible and they are sold at the lowest price possible. And the factors of production, the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur, they are fairly compensated. So the market mechanism gives the fair wage to the laborers, it gives the fair rent to the landowners, it gives fair rent to the owners of machines, and it gives fair profits to the entrepreneur. So there is no need of any intervention or a separate theory of distribution. So the market itself, the labor market, is efficient and equitable, the capital market and so on. So all the markets are fair, and through the market mechanism, so labor will sell their services, and the entrepreneur, the producer, will buy the services, pay a wage, and this is all fair and just. So there is no need of any intervention. Another reason why distribution is not a subject of study under capitalism is the idea of Pareto optimum. This is a state of allocation of resources in which it is impossible to make any individual better off without making anyone else worse off. Hence, Pareto optimum argues that the current distribution, whatever the workers are getting, is desirable, as any change harms someone, even if others benefit more. So the idea is you cannot distribute or redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor, because the if you take money or wealth from the rich, this would decrease the utility of those people, and it will increase the utility of some others. So the Pareto optimum would say that you cannot take wealth from the rich because you don't want to reduce the utility of anyone in the society. So the only way to increase the utility of the rich and at the same time increase the utility of the poor is to increase the size of the economic pie, i.e. increase the production. Because if you try to redistribute the existing wealth, this would lead to a decrease in the utility of the rich, which is unacceptable. So therefore, the way forward under capitalism is increasing the production and making sure that the poor get their wealth from the increased production, not from the existing wealth of the rich. So if 1 million persons felt themselves to be better off, but there was one person who felt he was worse off as a result of a proposed policy, then the economist was compelled to suspend value judgment about the desirability of that policy. So, with redistribution ruled out as an important way to raise the standard of living of the poor, the alternative is, of course, economic growth, increasing the size of the pie, as I mentioned. So, Pareto said, a decrease in the inequality of incomes cannot come about except when the total income increases more rapidly than the population. So, the idea of growth as the focus of capitalism, increase the production, increase the national output, increase the size of the pie, increase the total amount of goods and services in the economy. Don't focus on the distribution. The distribution will happen automatically by the invisible hand of the market. So Thoreau is another economist who said, if the country just has more growth, then it will have more good jobs and high incomes for everyone, and it won't have to worry about the distribution of those jobs or incomes. Individuals will be happy with their higher incomes. So don't focus on equity and issues of justice. Just focus on production. Just focus on making the markets more competitive, and the invisible hand will take care of everyone. So thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of the lecture. Much more can be said about capitalism, and more critiques could be provided, but since this is an introductory course, I think we've touched on the main points of critique, and inshallah in a future course we can look at a more detailed critique of capitalism. Thank you for listening. Inshallah, we will see you next week. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.